I knew that for it to work, people had to feel safe. I set leadership aside, including the CTO, and I made it really clear that participants could not fear losing their jobs if we wanted real learning and real solutions. I took it seriously then, and I still take it seriously today. So by title in my day job, I am a senior technical program manager at a software company. I started there in January of 2011. I was employee 114. Now, over time, that company grew significantly. Multiple acquisitions, many product lines, and over 6,000 employees worldwide. Now, by the end of 2018, all of that growth had created a problem that we couldn't ignore anymore. Incidents were being reviewed through postmortems, but the learning wasn't traveling. Action items to prevent future incidents were staying siloed within those teams, and similar incidents kept reappearing all across the different product lines. And that's when I built our root cause program from absolutely nothing. There was no, here's how you do it for a software company. But it was in those meetings, in those review meetings, where I was facilitating 5 whys with highly technical teams that I became something I hadn't set out to be, a human system observer. Because what I was hearing wasn't just technical failure, it was how the system was quietly allowing people, quietly asking people to compensate. So the engineers I work with, they always bring me the technical story, and they should. That part matters. But they're software engineers, so they introduce it as if I know the information like they do, like I'm intimate with their code and their infrastructure. And honestly, for a few of these teams, I've seen them often enough that I actually know their systems in and out now. But while they're talking about things like Istio sidecar injection failures, pod evictions, and race conditions, I'm listening for different words. After a few questions, I start to hear words like manual, assumed, default, skipped, expected, or, we just thought it would work. Because those words tell me where the system quietly asked a human to compensate and risk now has entered the system. So I started noticing the same things in my RCAs, not in the code, but really in their causal story. So the way my 5 whys will work with my teams is I start by asking them, what was the last bad thing that happened? And the example I have here on the screen, the last bad thing that happened here was that a deployment had to be rolled back because a configuration change caused the service to fail on startup. That's because an incorrect value was applied into that configuration. And that's because the change was made manually. Now, right here on your 3rd why, this is typically where my team stop one line of their conversation. So instead of telling me why the change was made manually and continually down that line of whys, they now start telling me why they missed it. And I see this with bugs all the time. Production issue, error, because there was a bug. Here we missed the bug on code review, we missed the bug on testing. They stop at that 3rd why for them because the change was made manually. To them, they don't see another why. It's a manual change, Melissa. That's just what it is. So now they go in and they tell me why we missed it, because that's the world they live in. Everything is about testing and quality assurance. So in this case, they're telling me there's no validation for the scenario, and the scenario wasn't previously identified. Now, my gut instinct would be, hey, let's go to a 6 why. Tell me why the scenario wasn't previously identified. But when I have done this, I get a room of shrugged shoulders. And they want it, look at me like, why are you asking that question? And if I continually push on that 6 why wasn't this previously identified? They'll finally say, we didn't know what we didn't know. And if I let that conversation end there, the learning might also stop. We've solved for the incident. They have great solutions. Maybe this change is now going to be automated. They've absolutely added validation. They know about this scenario. It's a configuration change, so maybe it's not something we do often, but this thing isn't going to happen again. But I will have another one like it somewhere else next week. So instead of pushing on the next why, I ask a different question. This is the question for me that almost always changes the conversation. What was new here? And what I've learned is that new almost never shows up cleanly in the first pass of an RCA. And it's not because they're hiding it. It's because in most technical environments, new doesn't register as risk. New is every Tuesday. The people I work with are operating in constant change, new services, new tooling, new ownership, new workflows. It's normal to them. So when everything is new, new just stops standing out. It doesn't get flagged as important. And that's why I have to tease it out. And when I ask the question, what was new here, then the real story starts to emerge. And I can physically see it in our meetings. There's this shift when people start talking about the new thing. It's almost like they're seeing it for the first time. There's a strange excitement. They're like, oh, yeah, actually. And out comes this whole story that is not in the document. Now, this isn't a capability problem, it's a perception problem. New feels normal until something goes wrong. Suddenly, we're not talking about what failed, we're now talking about where the system might have been stretching for the first time. So the triangle holds the three conditions that keep showing up and kept showing up in incident after incident, not as causes, not as mistakes, but as conditions that change the reliability of a system. Now, I call it the human error triangle, not because it explains why people fail, but it shows where the system quietly sets people up. When I say new, I don't just mean brand new code. New shows up in a lot more places than we tend to acknowledge or we even tend to recognize. It can be the first time a process is run end to end, the first time new infrastructure is exercised under real load, or the first production deployment of something that has been tested everywhere else. What makes new fragile isn't the lack of skill or care, it's that new work hasn't built up feedback yet. There hasn't been enough time for reality to push back. We can have multiple lower environments in software, right? Dev, QA, sandbox, staging, integration, all before anything ever hits production. We can test, validate, and review. But the first time something hits production is still the first time it meets real users, real data, and real behavior. This isn't a failure of testing, it's the nature of a complex system. Anything we don't exercise regularly behaves as new. New isn't a mistake, it's a condition. And when we don't name it, we miss an early signal that the system may be more fragile than it looks. Now, on its own, new doesn't always cause incidents, but the risk increases when new meets something else like unfamiliar. Unfamiliar is often framed as a people problem. In most systems, knowledge lives in people far more than it lives in documentation or tooling. That's not because teams are careless. It's because systems evolve faster than their documentation can keep up. And when that happens, the gap gets carried by the people doing the work. Now, the fastest way to surface that gap is when someone new has to step in. If you want to test it, throw a new person at it. Now, it's not because they're inexperienced, but because they haven't inherited the tribal knowledge yet. The shortcuts, assumptions, and context that build up over time. The point here isn't to call out humans for not knowing something. It's easy to point at the junior dev. The point is to recognize how often systems rely on human memory to stay functional and how fragile that becomes as organizations move faster, scale, or experience turnover. Unfamiliar is not a people problem, it's a condition and a signal that the system depends on knowledge it hasn't yet made visible. And when unfamiliar meets something else like time pressure, the risk increases. But there's a second kind of deadline that I see maybe even more often, and that I call narratively immovable deadlines. These are the deadlines where we believe we can't move because of the story around them. Maybe we've already told the customer the date. Leadership has already announced it. The comms has gone out. It just feels too late to question it now. So the date hardens, not because it's structurally enforced, but because no one feels safe or able to challenge it. And once pressure is present, regardless of the type, the system behavior will change. Safeguards get traded for speed, reviews compress, testing narrows. Often I'll see suddenly we're only testing happy path. Exceptions get made, and not because people are reckless, but because the system is now optimizing for time. This is where pressure becomes dangerous, not because deadlines exist, but because they quietly remove slack from the system. And what matters for this model isn't whether or not the deadline was truly immovable or only felt that way. What matters is the pressure was present, and once it is, the risk increases. If I hear one of these conditions, new, unfamiliar, under pressure, I don't jump to conclusions. One condition on its own doesn't mean that something's going to fail. It just means to me the system is a bit more vulnerable than it may look. When two of them show up together, now you've got my attention. That's when I start to slow the conversation down, because the system is now operating with less margin for error. And when all three are present, I consider the system to be in a high-risk state, regardless of whether or not the incident has already happened or not. The escalation usually isn't named before the incident. We can certainly point to it after the outage and say, yeah, of course this was risky, like look at this. But at the time, it feels like normal work to everyone that was involved in it. And because it was normal, we don't respond to it as risk.